Hey guys, and welcome back to the Daniel and Mark Show. This show is brought to you by Hardcore Head Start, and thanks for joining us again. Hey Daniel, do you remember? You would have only been 5 years old, I think. But do you remember of a store where you'd go in and you'd bring home movies and games and that sort of thing? A place called Blockbuster.
Oh, I can't say I remember. I'm not sure if I ever actually used it for this purpose, but I know it in the example that I think you're going to use.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I because from what I remember, the 2000s, early 2000s was pretty much like the last, I guess, where it was really sort of being, sort of like on its last days.
Mm.
And based on my maths, you probably would have been, yeah, around 5 years old. So I wouldn't blame you if you didn't remember. But
Probably would have been some mum and dad watching those movies. Not sure
yeah,
that we would have been watching them, but yeah.
yeah, true. Let me tell you a little story of an old man story. All
There
right.
we
so
go.
so so as a kid, I used to go into these big departments. They look like sort of department stores, right? You'd go around these big shelves. There'd be sections for movies. There'd be section for video games, consoles, etc. Right. My thing was always to go to the PC section,
Mm.
and there'd be these big books, right? But there were cases for games, and they used to spend a lot of time on the art.
Hmm.
And I'd bring home something like Age of Empires, right? And you'd get the option to hire for 3 days or 7 days, and I'd I'd bring home a game like Age of Empires and play the fucking shit out of it for like a week,
Mm.
and then be so sad there'd only be like 1 day left, and I'd have to bring it back and return it. So you paid you paid something like, I think it was like $7 for 7 days, but
Mm.
back then $7 could get you like a full meal, right? It could get you
Hmm.
lunch, and like a drink, like a really like big lunch and a drink.
Mm.
So that was kind of like a big deal for my parents to let me take home a game. I used to be super excited. Um, but look, the reason why I guess I'm telling this story is kind of topical of what we're going to cover today. So a little bit about where I guess like leaders have made, sort of like bad decisions, right, during uncertain times.
Hmm.
And um, I guess as the story sort of goes, um, the Blockbuster CEO, John Antioco, there was a point in time where they had equal market share. And in fact, I think it was Reed Hastings, one of the co-founders, and Mark Rudolph, actually approached John Tierco, the CEO of Blockbuster at the time, offered him $50 million to
They
buy.
were the founders of Netflix.
Yeah, the owners of Netflix. Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
they came to John Antioco during a meeting and put that table on the offer, and they got laughed. They got laughed out the door,
Mm.
basically, and it was just a matter of poor decisions by the leadership. Um, they had they had invested more than they could afford at the time, and they were just bad with money. So I think it was pretty interesting, and I think the rest was history. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
I think we know who came out ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what is it about the inability to pivot? That story is referenced a lot throughout kind of, I guess, times where, or just in business, I guess, where it's like, hey, make sure you're always trying to, I guess, beat yourself in
Hmm,
business. Take over yourself because if you're not, someone will do it for you. So we see a
hundred
lot of
percent.
businesses pivot beyond themselves so that they can be, the next leader in whatever space is going to take over the world in their specific niche. So it's very interesting. It's a pretty good story, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head, and like I guess building on that, like there's that theme of too big to fail. So
Mm.
I think I like Blockbuster for that example as well. A lot of people thought, Blockbuster ain't going nowhere. Literally it's almost not as big as Macca's, but you'd see them around, driving
Mm.
around.
Absolutely. I do try and, you know, as investors, you and I have to try and think of the worst case scenario at all times, right?
Mm.
And like, you look at the big companies today, you're like, which one of them has the potential to actually fail, or is maybe
Yeah,
most likely?
yeah,
You know, I think
yeah,
like this is not like a this is like it's going to happen, but there's so much controversy around Facebook and stuff like that in regards to their ads. This is not a hardcore opinion. This is just my opinion. Like Facebook might be one of those companies that seems like it's in a little bit more trouble than the rest of the big companies.
yeah,
And they bring on the next stage of Meta, which is what their new name is. It's not Facebook anymore. Can they bring on
yeah.
the next stage and pivot into something that's going to, you know, solidify them in the next generation? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting.
No, I think you raise really like super interesting point. Like, regardless of whether you're bullish and like invested in Facebook, based on fundamentals, I think everybody can agree Facebook is kind of going through an identity sort of crisis, right? Like,
Mm,
what exactly is a core part of our business? Otherwise, they wouldn't be looking at, sort of meta or like sort of differentiating themselves.
mm,
And they've been in the media a lot for for good reason. So
mm,
even as someone who thinks they can turn it around and really create a new strong value proposition, I think it's fair to say that there's there's some issues with the way they're currently running.
mm. I think the this idea of not necessarily not being able to pivot, but just in general, like uncertain times in business and in life, and when
Mm.
this type of environment comes around, it's interesting to think it from a business point of view, where you need to then pivot, or it's also and from a individual level, where there's also people who are working at Blockbuster at the time.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't just the
100%.
owner of Blockbuster. It's like not necessarily saying what's happening behind the scenes and that Netflix offering these um, to buy them and stuff like that. But like you as an individual, can you almost assess where that business is that you're working at?
Mm.
So can you see that, hey, streaming is coming in the future? I work at probably the places that's going to get destroyed first.
Yeah,
Do you
so
have the
true.
knowledge? Yeah, do you have the knowledge and skills to be able to see that then and learn?
Do you think uh, the larger companies now and the leadership team within those companies have learnt? Like, do you think they're sitting there like, fuck, we better not be the next Blockbuster, we better not be the next Kodak, right? We When we get big enough, we're just going to buy out these companies, or we're going to hedge if there's even a chance, like that sort of thing. Do you feel like the mentality's changed a bit, or do you think it's more or less the same?
I think people are smarter than ever,
Yeah,
and there's more stories than ever. But
yeah,
people's own, I guess, psychology, their own bias, their own bloody, well, everything under the sun, their own psychology. Like the same mistakes are still going to get made over time by some people. The people who
yeah.
don't make them have learned better and they'll do better, I think.
I mean, that's so true, right? It's not like before Blockbuster and Kodak, there weren't businesses that were fucking huge that
Yeah,
failed as well. It's just it's
exactly.
more well documented now, right? With
Yeah.
social media and Netflix and
Mm.
yeah, Netflix irony.
Well, I mean, I think businesses are growing larger than ever at the moment.
Yeah,
They're adapting faster than ever. Like they're changing because, the rate of technology is increasing. Their ability to do more is increasing. Um,
Mhm.
but it still comes down to like, so one of the best companies in the world is Amazon, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And, Jeff Bezos is one of the greatest capital allocators ever.
yeah,
It's not just on Jeff Bezos, but on Andrew Jassy as well. Like he's the new CEO. It's their job to continue to allocate capital in places where they can continue to grow and continue to pivot and continue to build out monopoly and conglomerate on every space that they have. But if they
Yeah.
don't, then I don't know. Who knows what's going to
I
happen?
think I think like even Amazon, right? Like I absolutely like have become a big like supporter of Amazon, especially in the last 2 years. Um, like prior to it, I didn't use the Prime services. I didn't use Audible, and like I didn't use a lot of the like streaming services from Amazon.
Hmm.
But I've gotten on board. But having said that, there are like potential little issues that are creeping. So, like for example, when you shop on the Amazon Marketplace, they've got this algorithm to decide which um, listings get shown up, like on
Hmm.
the front page. And there's been like a few complaints around. I think it's called Amazon Choice, the algorithm that's being used to determine which listings show up, and it's becoming like a little bit crowded in the sense of like it's not showing you kind of like a refined sort of marketplace. It's kind of just showing you a bit of everything where you go into like a big department store and it's kind of like it's got that a bit of everything for everyone. So it's kind of like a bit of the Wild West. Whereas like when it's a bit smaller or it's a bit more selective, sometimes you get choices that are like, wow, every time I go to this place, they only have like the good shit. They never
Hmm.
have these scorcher like, you know, products that you think because you're buying on Amazon, it's all legit, right? And then you turns out this guy has only got like 3 sales, and he's selling the same product for like 30% off, and it
Hmm.
turns out to be a scammer from the UK or something.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about like how on earth to get rid of that. Like I'm sure they're
Yeah,
working on algos to spot these things as quick as possible.
yeah,
It must be a hard task to train everyone and everything.
yeah, 100%.
So that's crazy. What was I just saying? Yeah, they've had some recently as well. I just read a book, Amazon Unbound, I think is what it's called. I read a couple
Mm,
of months ago, and in the book they were talking about kind of the a little bit of the controversies Amazon's been facing in that you know how they have the Amazon Best Choice. They actually uh, see that a product is from a third party is doing well, and then they just create their own, put a own brand
yes,
tag on it, and then charge cheaper. And
yeah.
I get that for that business owner who was doing that, that sucks. I really do, and I feel for that
Mm.
person. But for the consumer, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty good, and I think like that's the way. I mean, that is business, right? It's like if something is working, a bigger company is always going to have the more resources to be able to make it work.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, yes, it works. It's good for the consumer, but it creeps on sort of being unethical because, let's say, if you become a big manufacturer, right, and you supply to retailers, and your model has been manufacturer to retail to customer for a long time, and then you decide to go direct to customer. One of the things manufacturers continue to do is they have a manufacturers selling recommended retail price or whatever, right? The MSRP, and that's always a little bit higher so that the retailers can do the discounts or just be a little bit less so that they can continue to have a reason for customers to buy directly, right?
Hmm.
But if they start dropping their prices or like doing discounts and selling direct to customers, a lot of those retailers are now, sort of like potentially going to struggle where they
Hmm.
previously did well. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's the whether it's good or not, it's the unfortunate way of business where
It's more efficient.
Amazon's model is to give cheaper prices, and if you're just selling a singular product, it's not an entire kind of business. It's almost closer to it is pretty much drop shipping, which is a race to zero. And if you're racing to zero against one of the largest companies in the world, it's going to
Yeah.
happen a hell of a lot quicker than if you were just racing some of the individuals, I think.
Yeah, true. I guess like it's really interesting talking about these big companies, but I guess like more recently, we've had, you know, in the last 2 years, we've had really uncertain times with COVID and like, the lockdowns and isolations, meaning like a lot, like, heaps of sectors went like had staff that couldn't work throughout the whole period. People
Mm,
lost their jobs, they lost their main ways of making income. People had to sort of change things up. They got a bit of support from the government, but a lot of that's coming to an end now.
mm-hmm,
Uh, can you like sort of, I mean, what do you like? A lot of people lost their jobs during COVID.
mm.
Uh, I sort of want to touch a little bit on what people maybe could have done to, sort of become less at risk of losing their jobs during
Mm.
that time. Like, what do you have? Like, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, just to, I guess, give context previous is like I was very lucky during COVID, so nothing really affected me as much. I kept my job. If anything, it got better for me, and then I was able to leave my job because of,
Yeah,
I guess the stimulus being pumped in the market and markets pumping and doing.
you're selling into strength, bro.
So, and
Nah,
the
sorry.
skills and the skills I've learned. So it's like it's given me the ability to leave. So COVID for me wasn't actually that bad. So I just want to preface that when I say this for people because
Yeah.
the maybe kind of way I want to attack it is, I mean, maybe it's harsh, but it's previous to COVID. Is like, are you in a strong position at your work already? Are you a very skilled individual, and are you like, does the work almost depend on you?
Yeah.
Like,
Or another way put, if you're taken out of the equation, can the business continue to run, and will it run just as efficiently?
yeah, exactly. Like you want yourself to be such a big part of where you are working because it gives you the best chance in uncertain times to either continue on in your job, and while you're working, if there are no uncertain times, it allows you to, I mean, just work from a very strong point of view. It allows you to, I guess, if you're the manager, create your own schedules, learn a hell of a lot more because you're managing people. There's so many benefits of just being in, I guess, a strong position while you're working, and doing that helps when uncertain times comes around. But there are benefits of
Mm.
doing it even when uncertain times do not come. That
Yeah,
makes sense, Mark.
100% it does. And I think what you're talking about there is, like becoming so valuable to your company, becoming, indispensable at the place that you're working at. And I suppose like an example I can think of me trying to do that, like whether I was actually, you know, that valuable to that business or not, I'm not sure.
Mm,
But I, in sort of being worried for my job back at the start of COVID, or even like 2019, right? Even just before COVID,
mm,
I was thinking to myself, okay, the business that I was in at the time was going through an acquisition. So
mhm,
a change of hands, which also means a change of management, which also means a risk of my department, or maybe downsizing in my department, right?
mhm,
So while I was an account manager, right, who was sort of maybe one of the roles that are maybe a little less at risk because it's more client facing and sort of,
mhm,
ensures money comes through the business, I started actively making it um, my focus to learn some of the technical skills and pushing the buttons instead of being the person answering calls. So I started pushing the buttons, or sitting next to the people who were pushing the buttons initially, when it came to digital marketing. So they did the Google ads or the social media ads. And I just took that curiosity mindset. Like, hey, I know you're building the ads. If you don't mind, can I sit with you like after lunch for half an hour just to see what you actually do?
mm,
um, and literally started like that. And because I was like showing the eagerness to learn, they would invite me back to sit with them again, like a few days later. And when there was something else they're going through, hey, you could learn this. Like come over at X time, and I'll just show you how to do this. And
mm,
that started my mindset of actually learning how to do those things.
mm.
And I like to think it made me a little bit more um, harder to fire, I
Absolutely,
guess. Yeah.
100%. I think an example I can give that is, doubles down on your point, is when I was working at Nando's, a big thing, um, I guess previous to Dylan, I believe he put this kind of framework in.
Mm.
There's a few different roles when you're working in hospitality. There's the two
Yeah.
main ones to kind of talk about are just like the front of service. So, you're running food out and you're also serving customers and dealing with all those kinds of things. And then there's the back kitchen where you're literally just preparing food.
Yeah.
If you're working in a place like Nando's or you're working in a place like Macca's, um, we we started having essentially one crew just do the back, one crew just do the front. That's how it was when I started, I should say.
Yeah.
And what happens when you're having that is if you need to replace someone from the front, you can only use a certain amount of people, only the people that work in the front. And if you want to replace someone in
Mm.
the back, exactly the same, right? And then
Yeah.
when it comes to say, I guess having like the most well-rounded staff, it's very difficult to be able to just pick from anyone and use anyone. And then when it comes to firing, it's like who's the least competent in that specific thing, who's the least competent in that specific thing. So what Dylan
Yeah.
started doing is he started crossing everyone
Training.
over, cross training everyone over. So
Yeah.
people who were in the front, they would get time to work in the back kitchen. Go back kitchen would actually work on their skills and speak to people and start running out food. So not even just for Nando's, it was cross training, but it was also for like life. There's like they got communication skills, they know how to prepare
Mm.
food as well. So if they're living in their own house as well, um, and by
Mm.
cross training people, it meant that our entire staff was more valuable immediately.
Yeah.
So
100%. That's
it
such a
makes
good example.
yeah, and there's fewer people, some people who would kind of seek that out. Some people would be like, oh, I don't really like working back kitchen. I don't really like working in the front of house. And the easiest way to kind of, or the easiest people to get rid of are the people who only have those specific skills because they can't help out in specific
Mm.
scenarios when we need help out the back if they're only trained in the front. So immediately
Yeah.
you are less valuable if you can't do everything.
Yeah. I call that a win-win situation. So, if the it makes the team stronger, right? If like there's someone who calls in sick at the last minute at the front, you've now got somebody, you don't have to wait like an hour or something for somebody else to see if they can cover that shift. You've got someone who goes, "Hey, can you just come work the front just to cover the lunch rush or whatever," right? And I think it's good for the customers because you know it's kind of like when you have somebody that can sort of fill that gap, whether it's in a restaurant or it's on a phone call. You're like, hey, this person actually knows two different departments. He doesn't need to transfer me, and then I don't have to repeat myself again.
Hmm.
It's that sort of like fluidity. Yeah.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think um, like if you know uncertain times are coming or say the business is downscaling or just because you want to prep for those things, like you need to be of like interested in the change. People who always do the worst is the people who don't appreciate change and they don't realize change is coming quick enough.
Yeah, it's the resistance, the
You resist
resistance
change.
against change. Yeah, I
But
think.
if it's good change as well, just to clarify, like sometimes
Yeah,
sure there's things that shouldn't be changed, and if you're on the other side of that, you're going to be historically correct. Whether it's
yeah,
worthwhile or not to do that, I don't know.
yeah.
But
I mean, if you don't agree with the changes happening with your business, that doesn't change the fact that you still need to be adaptable until you figure out your next chess move, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
you need to be that person that's sort of malleable and then come from a position of strength so you can decide if you need to exit that business and find a new role or not.
Mm,
But things we touched on is make yourself indispensable by learning a new skill, cross
mhm,
training. There's a theme here, right? Learn stuff that makes you more knowledgeable than the next person, more
mm,
skillful than the next person. I guess like let's continue with Nando's. Like, um, a lot of uh, we've covered this a little bit in previous podcasts, but you had a time based opportunity um, when you were at Nando's. You were working really hard there. Do you want to speak to that a little bit about like I know it wasn't an uncertain time, but it was a time where you were trying to make the most of it. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So when I was a little bit younger, I guess kind of like, again, to reiterate the story, I was not doing much with me as a human being. Um, I had this idea of making money. I didn't know how. I was very lucky to have
Yeah.
Dylan come meet him at Nando's. And through a lot of talking over the years and stuff like that, started mentoring me. And I should say, realized that there was a time-based opportunity in cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin specifically. The price was like literally around $200. So, we were pouring as many hours into, say, our jobs, our 9 to 5s, like Nando's, to be able to get the money to pour it into buying as much Bitcoin and as much other cryptocurrencies as possible, because they were just at the beginning of their journey. I think the market cap was like $3 billion or something. Like, it was so small.
Crazy,
And
yeah.
yeah, madness, madness. Um, so, you know, Dylan realized that that's a really good idea and it could set us up. And as the name suggests, we want to go hardcore to get that head
Mm.
start. That's because we wanted to get ahead or out of our 9 to 5s as quick as possible. If you don't want to do it as quick as possible, don't go as hardcore.
Yeah.
Don't work as many hours. But then what we
Yeah.
wanted to do was leave as quickly as possible. And we started working, 60, 70 hours at the job just to be able to get as much money in. And then, the other 30 hours was spent on, learning, upgrading our skills, real knowledge based things to be able to increase those multipliers and in the markets and stuff like that. Is that what you're looking
Yeah.
for, Mikey?
Yeah, 100%, man. I love hearing that story every time. I think like the thing that sort of that I also, I guess, sort of take from that story is you there's there's working additional hours, and there's the physical grind, there's the showing up, and the exhaustion of, like, kind of pushing your body to being on your feet all day, picking up the extra shifts. But I think, like, if you're in a role that is very physical, um, the grind to balance it out, it almost needs to be around the theory, right? Because at some point you're going to want to be smarter so you can take a step out and make money without sort of putting in more hours. So I think the theory, the knowledge is really important for these people. So if you're working in warehousing, hospitality, all these, or nursing, just all these roles, or truck driving, anything that requires really long hours, yes, you have to grind for a while, save your money, but then also learn the theory. So how can I upskill and get into a higher position within hospitality, or how do I get into a high position within retail, or whatever role it is? Or do I just need to, in your case, like, learn the stock market, find another vehicle to make money, and learn all the theory around that to make that viable? And that's also an opportunity too. So I think it's a little bit of that. If you're doing too much of a desk job, you need to do something physical for your body, so you don't break down. If you're doing too much physical stuff, you need to work on the mental side so you can learn the knowledge.
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't heard someone frame it better than that, so I ain't gonna add anything to that, my friend. That was perfect. I would say maybe
It's all right.
the only thing I would
Yeah.
say is maybe the skills that you're learning need to be those foundational skills.
All uh any last words, Doc?
No, nothing from me. I guess go over this podcast because some of the things may sound a little harsh, as in, like, because COVID came from nowhere, but the reality is that you want to put yourself in a strong position at all times, anytime you can.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast, guys. You know what to do. Subscribe, like, and share the video around.